Hello and welcome. Today we are going to talk about GMAT Sentence Correction, one of the most tricky sections on the GMAT, mainly because of the dreaded GMAT grammar. Now, GMAT grammar can be a daunting experience for the most fluent students, leave alone students whose first language is not English. Even if you are comfortable with English, you might struggle with the GMAT type of questions where they test deeper understanding of GMAT grammar rather than just testing the standard rules. However, if you're not comfortable with nuances of GMAT grammar, then the common list of standard rules tested on the GMAT will not make much sense anyways. Improving grammar is easier said than done. It can take months, if not years, to get a good grasp of the grammar fundamentals. So how do you manage your GMAT sentence correction prep? The best and the most foolproof way is to get specific background on GMAT grammar, which is a subset of overall English grammar. And once you've got that background, then delve onto the GMAT kind of questions and how we solve them. Another thing to keep in mind is logic plays a big role in solving GMAT sentence correction questions. And when we actually get to some of the questions, we'll see how the thinking process should be if you want to score in the 99 percentile. First, let's look at the three essentials of good writing, and these are purity, perspicuity, and precision. Purity is essentially not using slang language or newly coined words. You don't get too many questions based purely on the purity of writing on the test, so we'll skip this. Moving on to the next one, perspicuity. This essentially means not using any words that could cause confusions or could be interpreted in different ways by the reader, being clear. And then we have precision, which is not using too many or too few words. Perspicuity and precision based questions are regularly seen on the test. So let's take a look at an example of a perspicuity question first. So here is a typical test question that looks at precision. The question is, since a decade ago the cost of living has multiplied nearly 3 times. Now as such, there's nothing wrong with this expression, and you'll probably find it in a normal newspaper or a magazine. But what we have to do is, or try to do, is to see if any of these alternatives provide a better, more concise expression. So the first one is always a repeat of the underlined portion here. The second one says has almost tripled. So since a decade ago the cost of living has almost tripled. Could be a candidate. It's grammatically correct. So I'll just put a C here, which means B could be a candidate. Third one is almost 3 times as great. Since a decade ago the cost of living is almost 3 times as great. Doesn't sound too good. This great is just not making it sound correct really. Let's talk about the fourth one. Since a decade ago the cost of living is nearly 3-fold what it was. Again, it's a bit awkward the way it's constructed. So the two choices that could potentially be correct is the first one, which is no change, or the second one, which is more concise. So on the test, when you have two choices which are so close together, that's where the real test of your understanding of what the test makers are trying to ask comes to the fore. So for this question I would say that the correct answer is B, and that is because of this precision test, which is part of good writing. So for the purpose of the test, here is the English language in a nutshell. These are the key categories of parts of speech, and if you familiarize yourself with these, um, you should get a long way in terms of solving the questions that you get on the test. So while we won't be looking at each of these in this session, we'll just look at the first one and then go forward from there. So what's an article? An article is a word placed before a noun to show whether a noun will be used in a particular sense or in a general sense. So there are three articles: a, an, and the. Probably the most important is the, and we'll be looking at an example that shows how this article may be tested in a question. Then the first two are called indefinite article. I mean, really speaking, it doesn't matter what they're called. What is important is to know how these are used. So for instance, the phrase a man means any man whatsoever, and an apple could refer to any apple of any kind. However, the man means a specific individual, and the apple is referring to a specific apple. So let's look at a question which illustrates the concept of correct usage of articles. The Library of Congress offers a special collection of Afro-American literature ranging from personal accounts and public testimonials of slavery to the organizational reports and legislative speeches on freedom. Now the underlined part is to the organizational report, and you see the usage of the here. This means you're referring to a specific set of organizational reports. Now if you look at the answer choices, the first one is the same as the underlined part. Second one says to those who organize reports, which is pointing at a set of people who organize reports, which is quite different from what is given in the question. So you can eliminate B. C is to organization reports, so the is missing, the article is missing, so this could potentially be a candidate. Put a question mark here. Choice D is and organization reports, so ranging from personal accounts of slavery and organization reports and legislative. So there are two ands coming in, doesn't quite make sense. Last one, and the organization reports, is the same. You have an and here and an and here, so it leads to awkward construction. So potentially the only answer that could possibly be right is C or A. I'll just mark A. So now we need to look closely between choice A and choice C. So let's look at the question again. We'll leave out the redundant words or phrases and focus on what is really required to answer it. That's another key way of looking at these questions. Sometimes the questions are very wordy and there's a lot of unnecessary information, and while deciding between answer choices, it's best to leave out what is redundant. So the Library of Congress offers a special collection of this ranging from personal accounts. Now we are saying personal accounts, we are not saying specific personal accounts, so this is a generic one, from personal accounts and from public testimonials. Again, there is no the here. To the organization reports, this the makes it very specific. And moving on to legislative speeches, now there's no the here as well. So all the elements like personal accounts, public testimonies, legislative speeches are generic. Only organization reports are specific. and not consistent with the flow of the rest of this paragraph. So ideally this one underlined portion should be generic as well, and choice C makes it generic, hence C is the right answer. So here's the next question that tests usage of nouns. A growing number of sports at major universities involves athletic familiarity that much of the staff is unable knowledgeably to question. So a growing number of sports at major universities is kind of redundant, so let's just exclude this for the moment. So a growing number of sports involves. Now sports is a plural, and hence the underlined involves should be a singular. So this is one thing that certainly must happen in the answer choice that we select. It should be a growing number of sports involve athletic, so on and so forth. So taking a look at the answer choices quickly. First one is involves and is a repeat, so we exclude this. Second one is involves as well. Third one is involves as well. Fourth one could potentially be correct, and fifth one could be correct as well. So now in like 30 seconds we've narrowed down the answer choices to just two. Let's look at these two closely to find out which is potentially the correct one. So a growing number of sports involve athletic familiarity incapable of being knowledgeably questioned by much of the staff. Yeah, sounds correct. Let's look at D. A growing number of sports involve athletic familiarity that much of the staff cannot knowledgeably question. Now, if you haven't had much practice with these kind of questions, it might be difficult to choose between D and E, because there's nothing grammatically wrong with either and both are correct, so to speak. But for the purpose of the test, what you need to be aware of that the test makers prefer the active voice, and if you remember the earlier example, they prefer brevity, short sentences. So D is the active voice, E is passive, and E is a bit longer than D. D conveys the same information in fewer words and in an active voice. Hence, for the purpose of the test, D is the correct answer. Now, strictly speaking, if you ask a general grammar teacher at a high school, they'd say both D and E are correct and marking E shouldn't be wrong. But for the purpose of the test, we need to keep the specific rules in mind. Preciseness, active voice, fewer words, and that makes D the best choice out of the lot. So the next question is a typical test question involving adjectives. A report by the Secret Service has concluded that much of the recently unfounded transgressions against which the White House is accused comes from the opposing political party. Now there are quite a few words here, so what you should typically do is quickly scan the answer choices. So choice A, choice B, choice C all use the same word, start with the same word much, and D and E use many. So this itself means that you can either discard D and E directly or A, B and C. So let's read the question again. A report by the service has concluded that much of the recently. So what is this much referring to? It's referring to the transgressions. So just ignore the words in the middle. So much is referring to transgressions. Transgressions are basically a countable noun, and the adjective to use is many, not much. So for example, you may ask a question, how much coffee do you drink? Or how many cups of coffee do you drink? So how many cups of coffee is countable noun. So coffee is an uncountable noun, it's a whole, so you use how much coffee. Cups of coffee are countable, and here you use how many cups. So this essentially is what this whole question is based on, the awareness of which adjective to use for which kind of nouns. So between D and E, you have to now decide which is the correct answer. So let's look at D first. Reading the sentence with D, a report by the Secret Services concluded that many of the transgressions that are recently unfounded. Now, the original question is talking about recent transgressions and not transgressions that are recently unfounded. So this recently has moved from recent transgressions, it has become recently unfounded. So that has moved the meaning of what is recent. Is it the transgression which is the recent, or is it only recently that it has been proved to be unfounded? So not too sure about D. E says many of the recently unfounded accusations of which the White House is accused. This is a much better and clearer construction, and hence E is the right answer.